The lecture hall on Vega Prime was massive, shaped like a silver bowl that floated within a glass dome. Outside, stars glowed in the eternal night, their light touching the city towers that reached into the clouds. Inside that hall, alien students of many worlds gathered, each glowing or shimmering in their own way, their voices blending into a colorful noise before the class began. It was the Academy of Galactic Culture, the most respected place for young minds who wanted to understand the ancient species that had once existed before the Council united the galaxy. The subject for the day was marked in bright letters on the floating board. It said, "Humanity Pre-Contact Civilizations." The moment the word appeared, laughter rolled through the room. "Humans again," one of the scaled students hissed with amusement. "The soft ones who thought they could fly to the stars with fire and metal. They believed in myths," another added, his voice clicking. "They fought each other and called it bravery. No wonder they were banned," the laughter spread. For many young aliens, humans were nothing more than a strange story used to teach lessons about what not to become. To them, humans were emotional, unstable, too violent to join the wider galaxy. They were a warning, not an inspiration. At the front stood Professor Relka, an older being with silver eyes and long arms that bent backward like folded wings. She did not stop the laughter. She waited quietly, her gaze moving across the room until the noise faded. "Before you continue mocking," she said softly, "tell me what you actually know about them." A tall student raised his hand. "Humans were from a small blue world called Earth," he said proudly. "They destroyed their planet with war and pollution. That's why the Council banned all records of them." Another spoke up. "They were unpredictable. They fought even when they had no chance. They refused peace offers." The professor tilted her head. "And how do you know this?" The students looked at one another. "That's what the archives say," one finally replied. Relka nodded. "Ah, yes, the archives. Compiled by whom?" The room went silent. The question hung heavy. Nobody had ever asked it before. The professor turned to the main console and touched it gently. A hollow image shimmered to life, showing a small blue sphere surrounded by stars. "That," she said, "was Earth. Home to the most contradictory species I have ever studied, capable of kindness and cruelty, destruction and creation. The Council did not ban them because they were dangerous. The ban came for another reason entirely." Her words stirred curiosity but also disbelief. A young student near the back, a bright-skinned being named Vrixa, leaned forward. "Then why were they banned?" she asked. The professor smiled faintly. "That, my dear, is the question I want you to ask yourselves. The answer is not in any modern record. It was locked away long ago." The class buzzed with whispers. Relka closed the console. "For your next lesson, I will show you what little we are allowed to see. But remember this, humans were not erased because of what they did to others. They were erased because of what they made others feel." The bell tone echoed through the hall, ending the lecture. Students began leaving, still laughing, but now a little uneasy. Vrixa, however, stayed behind. Something about the professor's last sentence stayed in her mind. Erased because of what they made others feel. That was not the description of monsters. It sounded like the story of someone the galaxy wanted to forget for a reason deeper than fear. Later that day, in the Academy's Grand Library, Vrixa met with her friends. The library floated in silence, its tall shelves filled with holographic crystals, each glowing faintly with data. "I want to know more about humans," she said quietly. Her friends looked surprised. "Why?" one asked. "There's nothing left about them. The Council deleted their files centuries ago." "Not all," Vrixa said. Professor Relka hinted there's something hidden. Her friends exchanged uncertain looks. Curiosity won over caution. They followed her to the restricted archive section, sealed behind silver doors marked with red warning signs. Only senior researchers could enter there, but Vrixa had been helping in the archives for months. She knew a few old access tricks. With a careful movement of her fingers, she entered a low-level override code. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the air was still and cold. Rows of sealed data spheres glimmered softly, untouched for ages. The walls were lined with caution labels: forbidden history, pre-council conflict records, Earth origin systems. They stopped in front of one shelf. A single label caught their eyes. It read simply, "Human, visual evidence. Vrixa hesitated for a moment, then reached out and touched the sphere. The projection flared to life. At first, they saw blurry shapes, static lines, and strange mechanical sounds. Then the image cleared. A human face appeared, covered in dirt and sweat, eyes burning with focus. The being was shouting to someone off-screen, helping lift debris from what looked like a ruined city. The ground smoked behind them, yet people moved, running, carrying others, refusing to give up. The students leaned closer. None of them spoke. The recording switched scenes. It showed a storm of fire raining from the sky, yet small groups of humans ran toward it instead of away. Others worked together to fix something, their hands trembling but steady. There were no weapons in this footage, no scenes of cruelty, only survival, only courage. Vrixa felt a strange chill run through her. These were not the violent beings she had imagined. They were fragile, yes, but strong in a way that was hard to describe. Her friend whispered, "They should have died 1,000 times." Another said, "Why would they risk so much for strangers?" The holosphere flickered again. A new set of images appeared. A dark space station half destroyed, spinning near a red planet. Inside, a group of humans worked in silence, repairing broken panels by hand. They had no advanced drones, no artificial helpers. Just tools and determination. One of the students whispered, "That's madness." Vrixa shook her head slowly. "No, that's faith." When the sphere dimmed, the room stayed quiet for a long time. The students could hear only the soft hum of the archive machines. Finally, one of them broke the silence. "If this is true, then everything we learned is wrong." Vrixa nodded slowly. "That's why it was hidden." She picked up the data sphere again and noticed a code burned faintly along its side. It was an old council encryption mark. It meant this file had been sealed by order, not forgotten by time. They left the restricted section silently, their minds heavy with what they had seen. The laughter from earlier now felt shameful. That night, Vrixa sat by the dorm window overlooking the bright towers of Vega Prime. She kept replaying the faces of those humans in her mind. Their eyes, the dirt on their faces, the way they helped each other without question. She tried to imagine what kind of species would fight so hard to survive, not for power but for one another. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of Earth, the blue world lost to history, and of a people who refused to vanish quietly. The next morning, she walked into class early. Professor Relka was already there, looking over some old notes. Vrixa hesitated before speaking. "Professor," she said softly, "we found something last night." Relka turned to her, eyes calm but knowing. "I suspected you would," she said. "What did you see?" "Footage," Vrixa whispered. "Real footage of humans. They were different," the professor nodded slowly. "Different, yes. Not perfect, not peaceful, but different in the way a flame is different from the dark. They changed everything they touched, even in defeat." Vrixa frowned. "Then why erase them? Why ban their memory?" Relka sighed, her silver eyes distant. "Because the council could not bear to be reminded of what courage looks like." Vrixa did not understand at first, but the weight in the professor's voice made her realize there was a deeper story behind the ban. Relka placed a hand gently on the console. "Tomorrow I will show the class what remains of the record. Prepare yourself. Some truths do not fade quietly." Vrixa nodded. As she left the hall, she could already hear students talking outside. The word human had returned to their voices, not with laughter this time, but with quiet curiosity. No one knew that in the next few days that curiosity would become something far greater. For now, the truth waited inside the archive, sealed within the light of forgotten footage, ready to remind the galaxy that even the smallest creatures could carry a strength that no empire could erase. The morning light on Vega Prime was soft and golden, filtering through the transparent dome of the academy. Students walked along bright corridors, their voices calm but curious. Everyone was talking about the same thing now: humans. What started as a joke the day before had become the subject of quiet conversations and uncertain questions. Nobody wanted to admit it openly, but something about the word human had changed its weight overnight. It no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a mystery waiting to be understood. Vrixa walked quickly through the hall, her mind filled with the faces she had seen in the old footage. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see that human lifting a beam of broken metal, calling for help, not caring about danger. Those moments had felt real, too real to ignore. When she entered the lecture room, she noticed it was already half full. Usually, students would talk and laugh before the lesson began, but today the room was quiet. Even Professor Relka stood silently at her console, as if waiting for something unseen. When the final bell rang, she looked around and said in a calm voice, "Yesterday, I asked what you know about humans. Today, I will show you what you were never supposed to see." A shiver passed through the room. The professor dimmed the lights and the main holoprojector came alive. The first image that appeared was an old space recording. A fleet of small, rough-looking ships moved slowly across the stars. They were not shiny or advanced like the vessels most students knew. Their surfaces were scarred, their engines burned unevenly, and their signals crackled with interference. Relka explained softly, "These were human ships built long before the Council discovered faster travel. They crossed the dark by themselves without help, without knowing if anyone else existed." The students leaned closer. One whispered, "They traveled this far with those machines?" Relka nodded. "Yes, they were explorers. They didn't wait for permission to see what lay beyond." The footage changed again. It showed humans standing on the surface of a dusty planet, their faces covered with clear helmets, their suits marked with patches and scratches. One of them was waving a small flag, smiling even though the wind howled around them. Another voice spoke through the recording, filled with wonder. "First steps outside our world," it said. "We're not alone anymore." The students could hear cheering in the background, laughter, excitement, pure joy. For a moment, the classroom was silent. The energy in those voices reached them across time and distance. Then the professor spoke again. "Now what you see next is why the Council feared them." The screen changed to a darker scene. It showed a human ship under attack. Not from other humans, but from an alien force. Energy blasts tore through the hull. The transmission was shaky, filled with static and flashing lights. Inside, humans worked desperately, trying to repair systems, shouting instructions, refusing to abandon their station. One voice broke through clearly, firm and calm even in chaos. "Hold your line. We don't stop until everyone's clear." The students could feel the tension. Even though they knew how it would end, they could not look away. Relka paused the recording and turned to them. This was the first human contact with an alien species. It was not peaceful. The Council was not born yet. In those days, many species fought for control of the trade routes. The humans were in the way. The students exchanged uneasy glances. "And they fought back?" On asked quietly. "They did," Relka said. "With less power, fewer ships, and no allies." The footage resumed. Human ships exploded one by one. Yet every time a ship was lost, the others moved to cover its escape route. No one ran. No one gave up. At last, one ship remained, badly damaged but still firing. Its captain's final transmission echoed through the room. "If anyone out there can hear this, we are human. Remember that name." The signal cut off, leaving only silence. For a long time, nobody spoke. The room felt heavy. Finally, a student whispered, "They could have escaped." "Why did they stay?" Relka answered softly, "Because to them, leaving others behind was worse than dying." Vrixa sat still, her eyes fixed on the dim hollow image. She could feel her chest tighten. The humans were fragile, yes, but their will seemed unbreakable. It was as if their hearts burned brighter the darker things became. Another student, trying to sound brave, said, "But they still lost. Maybe that's why they were banned, because they caused too much trouble." Relka turned toward him. "If loss was a reason to erase someone, then half the galaxy would be forgotten." The words hit the class hard. No one dared answer. Then she added, "The ban was not to protect us from them. It was to protect the truth from us." Her voice lowered as she touched the console again. This next footage was sealed by the Council itself. It was taken from their own ships during the later wars. The screen lit again, showing a wide field of stars. Human ships stood in formation, fewer than before but more organized. Their designs were newer, smoother, with glowing energy shields. But what caught everyone's attention was their formation, perfectly aligned, silent, waiting. Then an enemy fleet appeared, massive, endless, stretching beyond sight. The humans did not move. No sound came from their channels. Then a single transmission played, the same voice that had echoed before. Come clear, filled with strength. Hold your ground. The galaxy watches. The battle began. Energy beams filled the screen. Explosions flashed everywhere, but through the chaos, the human fleet did something impossible. They adapted. They learned from each shot, each loss, changing tactics faster than any computer could predict. Every time one ship fell, another filled its place, covering the gap without hesitation. They fought as if the word defeat did not exist. The footage cut to the final moments of the battle. The human flagship burning, engines failing, drifted toward the enemy line. The captain spoke one last time, his voice quiet but steady. As long as one breath remains, humanity stands. The ship vanished in a blinding light. Then silence. The professor stopped the recording. The room stayed dark. The students were motionless. After a long pause, she said, "That battle ended with victory." But only 2 ships survived. The council arrived days later and found nothing but wreckage and silence. They realized then that humans could not be ruled. They could be destroyed but not controlled. So they banned them. They erased their name, their history, their memory. The projector dimmed completely. The class sat in darkness, lost in thought. Vrixa finally spoke. "They fought not for power but for each other." Relka nodded. "That is what made them dangerous to the powerful. A people who fight for each other, not for greed, cannot be conquered." When the lights slowly returned, the students were no longer laughing. Some looked ashamed, others thoughtful. The idea of humans had changed forever in their minds. After class, Vrixa stayed behind again. "Professor," she said quietly, "if they were erased, does that mean none of them are left?" Relka looked at her for a long time before answering. "No one truly knows. Some say they left the galaxy. Others believe they are watching, waiting for the day we remember them." She smiled faintly. "History has a way of circling back. The truth never stays buried forever." Vrixa left the hall, her thoughts heavy but alive with wonder. The streets outside shimmered under the light of distant suns, but in her mind she saw the blue planet again, the faces of humans standing in storms, their eyes shining with quiet fire. That night, she opened her personal console and watched the footage again. Every time she saw them, she felt something rise in her chest. Respect, curiosity, maybe even hope. She whispered to herself. They stood when no one else did. Maybe that's what makes them human. Unseen by her, the console light blinked softly. The data she had opened was transmitting quietly, reaching out into the network of the Academy. Somewhere deep in the archives, more files began to unlock. It would not be long before others saw them too. The laughter that once filled the classrooms of Vega Prime had faded. In its place, something new had taken root, a quiet sense of awe. The name human was no longer a forgotten warning. It had become a symbol, whispered softly among students as a question that burned in every curious heart. Who were they really, these beings who refused to fall even when surrounded? And why did the galaxy fear their memory so much? No one knew it yet, but the answers to those questions would soon shake the entire council. The room was silent now. The young aliens who once laughed at the name human no longer spoke. The holographic display still glowed faintly in front of them, showing the last frozen frame of what they had just seen. A battlefield covered in smoke, burning ships falling from the sky, and small human figures standing firm even as everything around them crumbled. Vrixa stood still, her mind racing. Her hands trembled slightly as she paused the footage. She could feel the weight of what they had just witnessed. The air felt heavy, as if the old echoes of that battle still lingered somewhere in the room. The first video had shown humans rebuilding after disasters, helping one another without any expectation of reward. But this second footage, this was different. It showed something deeper, something that touched even those who believed themselves beyond emotion. The humans were fighting a war they could not win, yet they refused to surrender. Their ships were outdated, their weapons weak compared to their enemies. But still they fought. They didn't fight for territory or riches. They fought for each other. The audio was old and filled with static, but the words came through clearly. A calm voice said, "This is Captain Hale of the Earth Fleet. We will hold the line. For as long as one human breathes, we stand. No shouting, no anger, just steady courage. One of the alien students, a tall figure covered in pale scales, spoke softly. They were hopelessly outnumbered. Why didn't they retreat? Another answered, because they couldn't. They were defending their own world. The footage continued. Explosions shook the screen. Small human ships darted between enormous alien warships like insects fighting giants. The humans were fragile, but their movements were precise, desperate, full of focus. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting because stopping meant extinction. Then came the final part. The human fleet was nearly gone. The last few ships burned in orbit above a blue planet. Captain Hale's voice came again, quieter this time. We're out of options. Tell the colonies. Tell them we bought them a chance. That's all that matters, and then static. The screen went dark. No one spoke for a long time. Even the usual background hum of the archive seemed quieter. Finally, Vrixa turned to the others. They knew they would die, she said softly, but they still kept fighting. One of her friends whispered, Why were we never told this? That question hung in the air. It was a question none of them could answer. They had always been taught that humans were banned for being too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous. But what they had just seen was not mindless violence. It was sacrifice. It was love for their home, for their people. Vrixa replayed a short segment again. The moment a human pilot's ship exploded after ramming an enemy cruiser to protect another vessel. The pilot's last transmission was simple. For Earth. Those words echoed in her ears long after the image disappeared. Another student, smaller and more cautious, finally spoke. Maybe that's why the council banned them. Not because they were monsters, but because they made everyone else look weak. The others turned to look at him surprised, but as the idea settled in, it started to make sense. Humans had done something most species feared. They had faced the impossible and still chosen to fight. They had shown that courage didn't come from power, but from choice. And maybe the galaxy couldn't handle that truth. Vrixa closed the archive carefully and looked around. We need to show this to the professor, she said. She needs to see it. But one of the others shook his head quickly. Are you crazy? This is forbidden. The council would shut down the academy if they found out we accessed this. Vrixa thought for a moment, then said, Maybe it's time someone asked why it's forbidden. Her voice was calm, but firm. The others hesitated. They all knew that breaking the galactic ban on human material could lead to serious punishment. But the images they had seen, those faces, those voices, had already changed them. They couldn't unsee what they had seen. That night, Vrixa couldn't sleep. She sat by her dorm window staring at the twin moons over Vega Prime. Her thoughts were filled with those human eyes. Tired, frightened, but still burning with something unbreakable. Why had they been erased from history? What was the council so afraid of? The next day, when she entered the classroom, she noticed something different. The students who had once laughed when the word human was mentioned were now quiet. Their eyes darted toward the screen, then toward the professor. Professor Relka began her lecture as usual, speaking about extinct civilizations. But Vrixa could no longer listen the same way. She raised her hand. Professor, she said slowly, why were the humans really banned? The professor froze for a moment. The question caught her off guard. Because, she replied carefully, they were dangerous. Their history was filled with wars and destruction. Vrixa met her gaze. I've seen the archives. The footage of the Battle of Orbit 7, they weren't trying to destroy. They were protecting others. They fought because they had no choice. The room fell silent. The professor's expression changed. It wasn't anger, it was something like sadness. Who showed you that footage? She asked quietly. Vrixa didn't answer. The professor sighed and turned off the display. You shouldn't have seen that, she said, but I suppose it was inevitable. The truth can only be buried for so long. The students leaned forward. For the first time, the professor didn't sound like she was lecturing. She sounded like someone remembering. Humans were not banned because they were violent, she said. They were banned because they refused to obey the council. They wouldn't join our structure of power. They saw through it. They saw how politics twisted peace into control. They fought for what they believed, and that frightened those in charge. She looked at Vrixa with tired eyes. The council called it protection, but it was shame. They didn't want the galaxy to remember what true courage looked like. The class sat in stunned silence. Vrixa whispered, "So the ban wasn't about fear. It was about pride." The professor nodded slowly. "Perhaps, or guilt. The council thought they could hide humanity by erasing their name, but they forgot something important. Humans have a way of leaving traces, not just in records, but in hearts." Her voice softened. "You saw that footage, didn't you? You felt it. That's the real reason they're dangerous. Not because they destroy, but because they inspire." The words sank deep into everyone in the room. Even those who had mocked humans before now looked down, ashamed. After class, Vrixa stayed behind. She needed answers. "Professor," she said, "if the council lied, what do we do now?" The professor looked out the window at the stars. "We remember," she said simply, "and we tell others carefully so the truth can live again." That night, Vrixa sat at her desk replaying small clips from the footage again and again. Every time she saw the humans standing together, she felt something stir in her chest. Something like pride for a species that wasn't even hers. She thought about their words. "As long as one human breathes, we stand." Maybe in a way those words were still true. Maybe humanity wasn't gone at all. Maybe they were waiting for the rest of the galaxy to be ready to understand what they had tried to teach. Outside, the twin moons shone over Vega Prime, bathing the city in silver light. Somewhere beyond those stars, perhaps the humans were watching, silent but still alive in spirit. Vrixa smiled faintly. For the first time, the name human didn't sound like a myth. It sounded like a promise, and she knew this was only the beginning. The following day, the academy halls were strangely quiet. Whispers floated through the corridors like wind. Every group of students seemed to be talking about the same thing: the humans. The story had spread faster than anyone expected. Some students claimed they saw the hidden footage in Professor Relka's class. Others said they found more recordings buried in the archives, showing humans standing against impossible odds. The truth was, no one really knew how much of it was real, but everyone wanted to believe it. For the first time in years, the word human was spoken not with laughter or disgust, but with awe. Vrixa sat alone in the library, the glow of her data screen lighting her face. She had watched the footage over and over, searching for something she could not explain. Every time she looked into those human eyes, she felt something familiar, as if a forgotten part of every living creature stared back at her through the centuries. Behind her, the soft footsteps of Professor Relka broke the silence. The old teacher stopped beside her and looked down at the glowing screen. "You've been studying them again," the professor said gently. Vrixa turned, feeling a little nervous. "Yes, I can't stop thinking about them. They weren't perfect, but there's something real about them. Something we lost." Relka smiled faintly. "You're beginning to understand what frightened the council most." "What do you mean?" The professor sat beside her. The council feared humans not because of their strength or weapons. Many species have those. They feared what humans could make others feel. When humans arrived, they made people question their own nature. They made entire civilizations remember what courage and empathy truly meant. Vrixa frowned. "Empathy?" Relka nodded slowly. "Yes, they had a strange belief that every life mattered, even those they did not know. They would risk everything for someone they had never met. That was their greatest strength, and their greatest danger." The professor leaned back and sighed. When the wars ended, the council offered them a seat, but on strict conditions. They had to limit their weapons, their exploration, and their independent decisions. The humans refused. They said no one should control what is right and what is wrong for others. Then they sent one message to the council, a message that changed everything. Vrixa looked up. "What did they say?" Relka turned toward the vast window, watching the stars. Her voice softened. "They said, 'We'll return when you're ready to be better.'" The words hung in the air. Vrixa's eyes widened slightly. There was no pride or threat in that message, just quiet disappointment. After that, the professor continued, the humans sealed their borders. Their ships vanished from the stars, and the council, humiliated, banned all record of them. They wanted the galaxy to forget. They wanted no one to ask why a species so small could make them feel ashamed. Vrixa sat in silence. The idea of erasing an entire civilization out of guilt made her chest feel heavy. "So the human ban wasn't about danger," she said softly. "It was about pride," Relka nodded. "Yes, and pride is often more destructive than any weapon. The room fell silent again. Only the faint hum of the archive machines could be heard. Vrixa stared at the screen one last time, then turned it off. "The others need to know this," she said. "Everyone should see the truth." The professor gave a small, tired smile. "Be careful, child. Truth is a light that burns those who try to hide it. If you show it, you'll make enemies." "I don't care," Vrixa said firmly. "They deserve to see who humans really were." The next day, she carried out her plan. The Academy had an open lecture forum every 7th day, where students from all departments gathered to share research. Normally, it was filled with debates about history, politics, and science, but that day it became something entirely different. When her turn came, Vrixa walked to the center of the hall. Thousands of eyes turned toward her. She looked nervous but determined. "I want to talk about a species we've forgotten," she began. "A species we were told to mock. The humans." The moment she said the word, murmurs filled the air. Some laughed quietly, others frowned, but many listened. "They were called dangerous," Vrixa continued. "They were called violent, unstable, and foolish. But that's not the truth. The truth is they cared. They cared enough to fight for each other when everyone else would have run. They built worlds, they healed strangers, and they stood against powers that were far greater than them. And when the council asked them to kneel, they refused." The crowd grew quieter. Vrixa tapped her wrist console. A beam of light projected into the air. The footage appeared. The same recordings she and her friends had seen. Humans in storms and fire, in battle, saving one another, never giving up. The room was silent. The projection ended with the final transmission. The voice of the human captain saying, "As long as one breath remains, humanity stands." When the image faded, there was no sound, not even from the professors watching from the upper decks. Vrixa looked around. "We laughed at them because we were told to, but now that we've seen them, we can't pretend anymore. The ban wasn't to protect us. It was to protect the pride of those who couldn't face what humans showed them, that compassion is stronger than fear, and unity is stronger than control." For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly a pair of hands began to clap. Others joined in. Soon the entire hall echoed with applause. Some students stood up. A few even cheered softly, but not everyone was pleased. At the back of the hall, 2 members of the Academy Council watched silently. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes were cold. One turned to the other and whispered, "Shut this down." By nightfall, the footage had spread across the entire Academy network. Students were copying it, sharing it, translating it into hundreds of alien languages. Within hours, it had escaped the Academy firewalls and spread across the galactic net. By the next morning, everyone was talking about human, not as myths, not as monsters, but as legends. Vrixa woke to hundreds of messages on her console. Some were words of support, thanking her for showing the truth, but others were warnings telling her to stop before the council acted. When she arrived at the Academy, guards were waiting. They told her the High Council had ordered an inquiry. The footage she shared was now considered restricted cultural material. The professor met her at the entrance. "You did well," Relka said softly. "But now you must be careful. The truth you released can't be hidden again, but those in power will try." Vrixa's voice trembled slightly. "Will they erase it all?" Relka shook her head. "No, it's too late. Once an idea spreads, it becomes part of memory. Even if they delete the files, people have already seen it. They've already felt it." The professor looked proud, almost relieved. "You did what I never could." That night, across distant worlds, alien news channels began showing still frames from the footage. Commentators debated the meaning of the ban, the legacy of humans, and the possibility that they might still exist somewhere beyond the known stars. On one small outpost near the rim of the galaxy, an old observer looked up from his station screen. The signal from Vega Prime flickered across his monitor, the same human transmission that Vrixa had shown. He smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the light of the message. "Looks like they finally remembered," he whispered to himself. He reached for a small metallic case beside him and opened it. Inside was a patch, old, worn, and marked with the faded symbol of Earth. He touched it gently. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, a long dormant beacon flickered back to life. Its light traveled across the dark, carrying a single encoded message, a signal not heard in centuries, For those who could translate it, the words were simple. We never left. Back on Vega Prime, as the city lights glowed against the stars, Vrixa stood by her window. She didn't know about the signal. She didn't know what she had awakened. But deep inside, she felt something powerful, a strange warmth, like pride for a species she had never met. She whispered softly, "Maybe one day we'll see them again." Outside, far beyond the Academy's dome, a new light moved among the stars, faint but growing brighter, as if answering her hope. The galaxy that once erased humanity had finally begun to remember them, and somewhere, unseen, humanity had begun to stir again. The news about humans had spread far beyond the Academy now. What began as a rumor among students had become a movement across the stars. Every major channel on Vega Prime discussed it. Debates filled the airwaves. Some called it fake, others said it was proof that the Council had lied for centuries. The story had become too big to silence. Across the galaxy, people gathered in plazas and learning halls to watch the old human footage that Vrixa had shared. They saw the faces, the eyes, the courage, and something inside them stirred. For the first time in generations, many species saw a mirror of their own forgotten spirit. But not everyone was pleased. The Galactic Council held an emergency meeting in their great chamber, a ring-shaped hall built from silver stone and blue light. Representatives of hundreds of species sat in silence as the council head spoke. "This matter threatens the stability of our alliance," the head said, voice cold and calm. "Humanity was banned for a reason. The exposure of this material is a violation of our historical protection laws." A few murmured in agreement, but others shifted uncomfortably. One representative, a tall being from the Denthor system, spoke softly. "Protection laws? Or censorship laws? We erased an entire species from history because they made us uncomfortable. Is that justice?" The head frowned. "You forget their violence. You forget the wars they caused." The Denthor representative replied quietly. "I saw the footage. They were defending others. That is not violence, that is courage." The room filled with whispers. The council had not faced open disagreement like this in many years. The truth was cracking through the walls of silence. Back on Vega Prime, the Academy was surrounded by reporters and drones. Students shouted questions at each other, holding small glowing screens showing the same image. A human soldier helping a wounded child through smoke. It had become the most shared image in the galaxy. Vrixa could barely walk through the halls without someone stopping her. Some thanked her. Others warned her that she had made powerful enemies. But she didn't care. The truth was out now and no one could erase it again. Professor Relka watched all this quietly from her window. Her heart felt heavy, not from fear, but from pride. For years she had wanted to tell the truth, but she never had the courage. It had taken a student to do what she could not. That evening, she called Vrixa to her office. The old professor's face looked tired but kind. "You've started something far greater than you understand," she said softly. "The council can't undo what's been done, but they will try to twist it. They'll claim the footage was fake or that humans were still dangerous. Be ready for that." Vrixa nodded. "I'm not afraid." "I know," Relka said with a small smile. "That's exactly what makes you like them." Vrixa blinked, not sure how to respond. The professor stood and looked out at the night sky. "Do you know what the humans used to say? They had a phrase. The truth always finds a way. And now it has." Outside, across the Academy, lights began to flicker. The central broadcast tower of Vega Prime had started transmitting something new. A symbol, a circle with a blue background and a white silhouette of Earth, glowed across every public screen. Gasps filled the streets. Some thought it was a trick. Others said it was impossible. But one thing was clear: the humans were no longer silent. The broadcast began to play. A voice spoke. Not a recording from the archives this time, but something new, something alive. The voice was calm and steady, carrying across the stars in hundreds of languages. "This is a message to the Galactic Council," it said, "to the worlds that remember us and to those who chose to forget. Humanity was never gone. We chose silence because we believed the galaxy needed to find itself. Now it seems the galaxy has remembered." Vrixa froze where she stood. The voice continued. "We do not seek revenge. We do not seek power. We seek understanding. For centuries you called us dangerous. Perhaps we were. But danger and courage are two sides of the same flame, and no flame can burn forever in darkness. The message ended with the same symbol fading slowly into light. For a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. In the council chamber, panic erupted. Some demanded to trace the signal. Others shouted that it was impossible. The coordinates came from beyond the mapped systems, from a place believed to be empty. On Vega Prime, people poured into the streets. Some cheered, others cried. The humans were real. They were alive. Rixa stood in the middle of the crowd, tears in her eyes. She didn't even realize she was shaking. "They're back," she whispered. Beside her, Relka appeared, her expression calm but filled with emotion. "They never left," she said softly. "They were waiting. The next few days changed everything." Across the galaxy, old data files began to unlock themselves. Ancient messages, pictures, and transmissions that had been sealed for centuries. The human language reappeared on networks, their music played again, their art spread like wildfire. The more people saw, the more they understood. Humanity had been far from perfect, but they had left behind something no law could destroy: inspiration. A group of students from the academy formed a movement called Project Memory. Their mission was to gather every remaining trace of human history and preserve it forever, this time in public archives where no one could hide it again. Rixa became one of its leaders. She traveled to other academies, giving talks about what she had learned. Her words were simple but powerful. "We are not here because humans were gods," she would say. "We are here because they reminded us what it means to care. They showed us that courage is not about strength but about choice. They taught us that even the smallest voice can change the loudest lie." Her message spread quickly. People began quoting her speeches. Statues of unknown human figures were placed in museums again. Children learned the word human not as a warning, but as a lesson in hope. But deep within the Council's central archive, something else was happening. A secret message had arrived, a direct transmission from outside the galaxy. It was short, only a few words long. "Do not fear. We see you." The Council leaders stared at it in silence. None of their systems could trace where it came from. It wasn't a threat, it was a reminder. Humanity was watching. Weeks later, as the excitement began to calm, Rixa returned to the old lecture hall where everything began. It was empty now, filled only with the quiet hum of the air systems. She walked to the same spot where she had first watched the forbidden footage. The screen flickered one last time, showing a single line of human writing, words that translated slowly across her visor. "We were mocked. We were banned, but we never stopped believing." Rixa smiled. "Neither will we," she whispered. She turned off the console and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the rim of mapped space, humans were alive, waiting, watching, and maybe even smiling at how far their story had traveled. As she stood there, the lights dimmed slightly and a faint sound filled the air. Soft, rhythmic like a heartbeat. It wasn't part of the Academy systems. It was coming from deep space, repeating the same pattern every few seconds. It was a signal. The Academy's scanners confirmed it wasn't random. It carried structured data, old Earth code, something simple but powerful. When decoded, it read, "Home is where courage lives." The galaxy had once erased them. Now humanity had returned, not with fleets, not with power, but with a message. A message that reminded every species of what it meant to stand, to care, to rise again. And from that day onward, the name human was no longer forbidden. It was spoken with pride, with respect, and with a quiet kind of love. Rixa often thought about the first time she had seen that footage. The dirt-covered faces, the hands reaching through smoke, the voices shouting not in anger but in hope. Those moments had changed her life, and now they were changing the galaxy. The humans had been right all along. The truth doesn't need an army. It only needs to be remembered, and now at last they were. The galaxy was no longer the same after the message appeared. Home is where courage lives. Nothing could return to silence. It was as if an old heartbeat had awakened in every corner of the stars. On Vega Prime, the Academy had become a symbol of change. Visitors arrived from distant worlds, carrying fragments of history they had hidden or forgotten. Some brought small data cubes filled with human stories. Others shared tales passed down through generations. They said their grandparents once met humans, engineers, teachers, explorers. None had known those memories would matter again. Vrixa stood on the academy's balcony every morning, looking at the bright skies where human ships once flew. The news networks played endless debates. Are humans back? Should we contact them? What happens if they return? The questions had no answers, but one thing was clear. Fear was fading, replaced by curiosity and respect. For the first time, the galaxy spoke of humans with gratitude. Professor Relka often joined Vrixa there, watching the horizon. The old teacher had seen the galaxy change through centuries of study, but never like this. You started a movement, Vrixa, she said one morning. You didn't just show them footage. You reminded them what truth feels like. Vrixa smiled softly. I only opened a file. The truth did the rest. But deep inside, she wondered where the humans were now. Were they really alive somewhere beyond the stars? Were they listening? Or had that signal been a final message, a farewell to a galaxy that had once betrayed them? Weeks passed, then months. Across the stars, new monuments appeared. Not grand statues of kings or conquerors, but small glowing memorials showing the faces of ordinary humans. Doctors, builders, children, explorers. Each monument carried a line beneath it. Courage is not forgotten. Even the Galactic Council could not fight it anymore. Their meetings grew quieter. The members who once shouted for silence now avoided the topic altogether. The truth had won in a way no weapon ever could. Then one quiet evening, everything changed again. It began as a flicker across the communication arrays. The Academy's central tower picked up a repeating pulse, faint but steady. It came from the edge of the uncharted rim, the same direction as the last signal. Technicians rushed to trace it. The pulse carried human code, old but unmistakable. When decoded, it formed 3 words. We are near. The news spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, millions stopped whatever they were doing. Ships in orbit paused. Students left their classes. Workers froze in silence as every screen, every holo display, and every channel showed the same transmission. No image appeared at first, just the message, we are near. Then came a faint light. It wasn't a ship at first, more like a distant star slowly growing brighter. As hours passed, telescopes confirmed what everyone feared to believe. A human vessel was entering known space. Unlike the massive fleets of other species, the human ship was small, simple, and quiet. It looked aged, built with function over form, carrying marks of long travel, but its signal burned across the void with unmatched power. Vrixa stood with the others at the observation deck, heart pounding. The moment she had dreamed of was happening. She whispered to herself, they're really coming. The council sent messages immediately. Cautious greetings, diplomatic protocols, endless forms of official language. But the humans did not reply. Their ship continued on its path, heading straight toward Vega Prime. Hours later, the vessel appeared in the night sky, a glowing line descending slowly through the atmosphere. The air crackled with energy. Cities darkened their lights to watch. The ship passed silently over oceans, mountains, and plains, leaving a trail of blue light that shimmered like water. When it landed near the Academy, the world held its breath. No sound, no speeches, only the soft hum of engines fading into silence. The ramp opened, a single figure stepped out, tall, covered in a simple suit marked with the old insignia of Earth. The helmet opened slowly, revealing a human face weathered but calm. The eyes looked around not with pride or anger, but with quiet peace. Every broadcast captured the same moment. The first human seen in the galaxy for centuries. Reporters and officials rushed forward, but the human simply raised a hand and said no questions. We came to talk, not to boast. The voice was gentle, steady, carrying a tone that silenced the noise around. Vrixa pushed through the crowd. Her heart was racing so fast it hurt. She didn't know why she was crying. The human looked at her and smiled faintly. You are the one who opened the archive, the human said. Vrixa nodded, speechless. Then you already understand, the human continued. We never wanted to be worshipped. We wanted to be remembered honestly, not as saviors, not as monsters, but as people who tried. The crowd was silent. The cameras captured every word. Professor Relka stepped forward and bowed slightly. We wronged your kind, she said softly. We erased your name, your story. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it." The human smiled kindly. "That's all we ever hoped for." The next few hours became history. The human representative entered the Academy Hall, where once students had mocked Earth's name. Now the same hall was filled with people from hundreds of species standing in respect. The human spoke, not as a leader, but as a storyteller. They showed images of Earth, oceans shimmering under sunlight, forests moving like waves, cities built with hope, and faces of billions who once lived and dreamed. "This was our home," the human said. "It still exists, though we changed much. We traveled far, learned much, and waited longer than we thought possible. But we watched. We saw your worlds grow. We saw your mistakes, your kindness, your progress. We didn't return because we were angry. We returned because you were ready." The hall was silent except for quiet breaths. Then the human placed a small crystal on the table before them. Inside it, glowing softly, was a single recording, the same footage that Vrixa had first seen. "Keep this," the human said. "Never hide it again. The future belongs to those who remember." The room filled with applause, not loud or wild, but deep emotional applause from the heart. It echoed across the hall and through every broadcast in the galaxy. Later that night, Vrixa stood outside as the human ship prepared to leave. The stars reflected off its hull. She felt a strange sadness, as if watching a dream fade. The human turned to her once more. "You'll do well," they said. "You have something our people always believed in, curiosity mixed with compassion. Don't lose that." "I won't," she said quietly. The ship lifted off without noise, rising slowly into the sky until it became another star among thousands. When it vanished, the world seemed different, not because humans had returned, but because they had reminded everyone what mattered most: truth, courage, hope. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change. Borders opened. Worlds began to share knowledge more freely. Old rivalries weakened. People began calling this new time the Age of Memory. Vrixa continued her work at the Academy, teaching new generations about the lessons humanity left behind. Her classroom walls were filled with human art, quotes, and images. Every lesson began the same way, with the words, "Courage is not forgotten." One day, years later, a small message appeared on her console. It had no sender, no coordinates, only a simple text. "Thank you for remembering us." She smiled and looked up at the sky. "Always," she whispered. The galaxy had once erased them, but now every child knew their name. Every world carried their story. Humanity had not returned to conquer or command. They had returned to remind everyone what it meant to be alive, and that was their greatest power.